Hello and welcome to CS230. This is lecture 8 and this is lesson 3, and in this lesson we're going to be looking at how we do some Json file handling, again using JavaScript, and if it's file handling it means we're going to be using Node.js on the server side. So just a little recap, because we did look at this in a little bit of detail on Thursday. In order to work with files in JavaScript, we have to use the FS module, the file system module, and we saw that, as I said, in lectures already. So if you want to read a JSON file, in fact you want to read an ADI file, but we're just interested in JSON currently, we have two basic options. FS provides us with two functions to read files, one called readFile and one called readFileSync. Okay, so we saw an example yesterday using readFile where we were writing a minimal server, HTTP server using Node.js, and we had to write it in a very particular way using callback functions and event handling in order to be sure that we got the data. So, but both of these functions, and we actually used readFile, okay? So, but both of these functions perform a similar task, in other words, to read file from disk, but the difference lies in the way that they're actually executed. So, we're going to look at a very simple file. It contains a simple piece of JSON data, and we know it can be more complex, and we know we can work with more complex stuff and iterate over the resulting objects when we convert them with JSON.parse if you want. But for now, we just want to have something simple in a file. Here's the file, and I've called it student.json. Okay, so the difference between the two functions relates to synchronous and asynchronous file handling. So we're first going to look at the synchronous one because we didn't look at that yesterday, and that means we're going to be looking at fs.readFileSync. Okay, so here's a simple program. Okay, it uses strict, so it requires us to be much more careful in our definitions and declaration of variables, etc. And we're loading in the file system. Okay, then we're looking at getting the file data to be the result of opening this file called student.json. Now look, when we try to open and close files, we're going to have difficulties. Sometimes the file might exist, might generate errors, all that kind of stuff in practicals, but we're not going to worry about that here. Okay. Then we're going to let the student information create a JavaScript object from parsing the file data, and we're going to print that to the screen. Okay, so let's do that first before we go any further. Okay, and the file, here's our student.json file. Okay, and here is demo3, which is that file here. And yeah, it's called demo3. So let's go to our console and do that. So it's node demo3.js. Okay. Oh, demo03. And here I'm printing out some stuff. Okay, so what's happening in the program is I'm actually printing out the raw file data before I print out the data that's converted. Look at this stuff here. Okay, but we see that we have got the actual information that we wanted to print from the file. We're also getting this stuff, and that's because I'm printing out the file data as opposed to the data that's been parsed by JSON. You might say, Jeff, well, is it not a string? Is it not the same? Well, no, it's not actually. So let's go back here. So we saw that if we just print it, we actually get raw hexadecimal data in a buffer printed to the screen. So actually, we use JSON.parse to parse the raw data, convert it to ASCII, and then parse the actual JSON data in order to create a JavaScript object. So a whole lot is going on with the parse function here. And we saw that in the last example as well, okay, when we were looking at the revive functions, okay? So, so when we print the student object, we get the correct output, okay? So really, it does more, JSON.parse does much more than simple convert from strings to objects. And that's complex enough if you think about it, because if I asked you to write that as an exercise, it would be tricky enough, It handles and hides what's really happening when you read files. Okay, so you have to understand that there's some fundamental operating system file handling concepts really going on here, and you need to get those in order to figure out why we get this buffer stuff. Okay, I can't cover that with you, but you could ask your operating system lecturer or research it. Anyway, so that's synchronous file. Everything is nice. Asynchronous file handling is where we use the read file function, and it reads the JSON file asynchronously. So when the read file function is called, the file reading process starts, and immediately controls shift to the next line, executing the remaining lines of code. So once the file data has been loaded, the function will call the callback function that we provide, and it's just a parameter. Okay, so this way you aren't blocking code execution. In other words, you're not waiting for the operating system to get back to you with the data. So again, that's another operating system concept that you might need to research if I haven't actually encountered in lectures already. Okay, so here's one with read file. What's really interesting is that we have our strict read the file. This time we're reading the file and we're throwing an error, okay, if there's a problem. And we'll see that a little bit later in the next lesson. So in other words, the file might not exist or some aspect around that, okay? And then we parse the data and we print it again. Now we have this line, console.log. This print statement came after the read call. Here's the read up here. Here's the read call, okay? So when will this line be printed? Well, if we have a sense of what's going on, it depends on how long it takes to read the file, and you could say, but usually that will be longer, even if it's a small file, than it will to move to the next statement. So code does exactly what we do in the previous one, and we use the callback function here, the fat arrow version of that call function, and that's read once the file is completely read. Okay, and the reason we have this error being thrown is we can't use a try or catch with asynchronous code, because it's blocking. So the function instead gives us this error object, and we evaluate it if it goes wrong. We say that in the next lesson as well. It'll be null if there's no errors, and the raw file data will be in the variable data. Okay, so really what we want to do then is just, well, let's just run this, and let's see where I stored this. Demo 04. Yeah, it's demo 04. Let's have a look at demo 04. Okay, we'll clear it. And let's go down a little bit here and we say demo 04.js. And look, the print line came as we expected beforehand, even though it was statement was in the file was after. So here's the statement, the print. Came after the read. It was print before because it took a while to read the file and print it. And meanwhile, Java had gone on to the next statement to execute, but that callback function interrupted. When it was done, it interrupted the normal flow, and then it printed this out for us. Okay, so this is a little bit about synchronous reading of files. That's quite interesting. It's fun. Okay, so there is another way actually that we could actually use. We can use the global require method. We saw require already, you know, when we were loading in files. We saw it over here. Look, in the file require file system, and that will allow us to load JSON documents as well. And it'll come in as some data from the file, and the files, in order to use require, though, we need to actually call the file something named .json, and then it only loads it once, okay, because it's cached. So if you need to read it or use it again, then it'll only use the one that's there first time. So yeah, it's okay. It depends. There's some cases where you might want to do that. Okay, writing a file is very similar to reading a file. So there are two functions for writing files. Okay, so you can use write file or write file sync. So again, same one as last time. We could actually have a program here called we'd probably call it demo something else, I'd say. But anyway, so we're creating and this time we're creating an object, okay, JavaScript object, Joseph Blogs, course computer science, software engineering here, and we're using stringify to convert it to a string, and then we're writing that to a file into new student.json data, and we're sending it the data. So it's okay. So it works the same way as we did previously with file handling. It synchronously happens. And we can also do it asynchronously. Let me see that we do it asynchronously. Let me see that I write. I did, yeah. Okay, so this is the synchronous one, and that's for another demo. Okay, so this is for asynchronous. We can run this as demo 05. Okay, let's see this. Let's see this happening. And which one am I using? I'm using write file sync. Okay. And we can use it to create JSON files. And we can see that we created this file, use student. We can look at that file. And unsurprising, it worked nice. Okay, and there's ways to make that look pretty as well with your write if you want. But I'm not going to go into that here. Okay, we can do the same thing asynchronously. This time we can look at checking the error, checking the JSON write was completed here, and then we know that this statement will happen before the file happens or whatever. It depends on how long it takes. But like if you have lots of files to write, files writing that would take a long execution time, then it's a good idea to actually use the write file asynchronously. Okay, so that's it really. We've looked a little bit at reading and writing JSON files and using server-side JavaScript, in other words, with Node.js. Okay, thank you very much for watching.